We are documenting the conversation, and with each time we document a conversation, we create a framework based on their feedback or a breakthrough that happens during that discussion. And then that framework is shared with our member base, as well as those people who are not members but are interested to know what's going on in SAARC and want to have a deeper understanding of their region. So today we have gathered to talk about SAARC, which is just not a buzzword. It's something that we've heard before, but we know that it's been very inactive, ineffective, and because of that, we have suffered, not only India as a nation, but 8 countries altogether. Mr. Ehsan Malik, I will introduce Mr. Ehsan Malik to you first, and then I'll go on to Mr. Atuk Rala. Mr. Malik's background, he is currently the Chief Executive Officer of Pakistan Business Council, a research-based business advocacy body composed of the leading business in Pakistan, including the larger multinational companies from 13 countries. PBC's main goal is transformation of policies and operating environment to achieve sustainable growth, employment, exports, and import substitution. Prior to joining PBC in January 2016, Mr. Ehsan was the Chief Executive Officer of the Unilever Pakistan for 9 years, a period in which the business quadrupled in size. In a 24-year career with Unilever, Ehsan served as CEO of Unilever Sri Lanka, and also the regional of businesses in Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, and spent several years in the head office in the UK. Before joining Unilever in 1991, Mr. Malik worked for a Pakistani conglomerate with interests in media, pharmaceuticals, hotels, attractions, partnership with Bayat Laboratories, Intercontinental Hotel Corporation, Ford, and Gulfline. That's like a lot of experience and wisdom today. So Mr. Ehsan is also a member of the board of directors of Abbott Laboratories, Pakistan Limited, National Foods Limited, Gol Ahmed Textiles Limited, and Standard Chartered Bank, Pakistan Limited. A fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, Mr. Malik is an alumnus of Wharton and Harvard Business School. I welcome you once again, Mr. Malik, formally to Puro Innovation's virtual platform. And it will be an insightful and a landmark discussion because the experience and the exposure that you have in the revenue generating streams, which perhaps could snap this region out of poverty very soon. The second participant that we have today is Mr. Rohanta Athukurola from Sri Lanka. He has served the country as chairman and board of director for Sri Lanka Export Development when exports crossed 10 billion. Then as chairman Sri Lanka Tourism, he restructured the organization for the country to attract 1.8 million visitors. Mr. Athukurola was also the Commissioner General for the World Expo in 2015. He then went on to be the chairman of the 30 billion rupee retail chain, Lanka Santosa, where he turned around the organization. Mr. Rohanta Athukurola has served 3 presidents of Sri Lanka during his tenure in the public sector, and then went on to serve UNOP, United Nations OP, for 5 years, when the BEST project was won by Sri Lanka. And he himself won the Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Pride of the Nation Award. He is currently board director, Hemis Leisure Aviation Group, and many other private and public sector boards. Academically, he has a double degree in marketing, MBA, and a doctorate in business administration. He's an alumnus of Harvard Kennedy School, and he's been awarded the Exceptional Rotarian of the Year. Currently, Mr. Athukurola is the regional president and CEO of the Microsoft-owned global artificial intelligence company, Cooltract, for Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Pakistan. So we have someone who has so much exposure in tourism development, sports, and of course now in technology, which is what the world is looking at today. I know that everyone would want to know why are we doing this, and what do we really mean by peace in SAARC. So I genuinely feel that SAARC is really ready for peace The fact that leaders are coming forward and documenting their thoughts with us, it's a positive progress that we are enabling thought leadership in the region. For generations, we've had brain drain, because of which the regular and the mundane problems like conflict have eaten us up, and they're not new. Historically, the world has faced them in different times in history, in different ways. However, there were thought leaders to snap nations out of it so it could progress. The best example I could give you today is the animosity between Germany and France. Amidst the backdrop of Cold War, World War I and II, they've had 5 wars before that. The War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714. The 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. Wars of the French Revolution. Wars of the First Coalition, 1792 to 1795. And War of the Fourth Coalition, 1806 to 1807. Before World War I, from 1914 to 1918, and 1939 to 1945, World War II. So can you imagine European Union without them today? You cannot. So we have to imagine SAARC, because SAARC has so much more peaceful and friendly history than, and we were never, and we are not enemies. I just feel that we are facing certain problems, and we are unable to really come out of them. So that is why I have initiated this project, through which we can document problems and present frameworks to solve them. Now, economic interdependence is one of the proven framework in all the violent regions so far, and I don't see why it won't work in SAARC.
Geographically, Pakistan on the western border has got Afghanistan, which is a member of South Asia. But having said that, the security conditions there are not ideal, and we are not able to trade. We have Iran on the other side, which is not part of South Asia, but that is affected by sanctions. And of course, we've got India, where the critical relationship between the two countries unfortunately inhibits trade. Now, having said that, there is informal trade. It goes to other countries, and we'll come back to that. That just leaves China. And the interesting thing is that if you look at the inter-regional trade of South Asia, less than about 6% of the trade in South Asia is with each other. So as far as the regional context is concerned, Pakistan then only has one country where it is able to trade, and by virtue of free trade agreement, it has a significant amount of trade with China. But even if you move away from Pakistan and if you look at India, India actually has greater trade with China than it does with the rest of South Asia. So this is a very unfortunate set of circumstances that we find ourselves. Now, of course, there are certain hard realities that we've got to face up to. The fact is that most of the South Asian countries produce items where they compete with other South Asian countries. So there isn't a whole lot of potential for us to export to each other, for example, of textile goods. Textile goods happens to be the largest export item of Bangladesh. It is certainly of Pakistan. It is, I think, one of the largest in terms of trade in Sri Lanka. I know that tourism was a very large foreign exchange earner, and of course, Mahanta will talk about that. But I'm just purely on trade. I think textiles and tea, I think were significant. So we are not able to trade with each other on textiles. Then of course there are other items where we ought to be able to trade, but then the political differences get in the way. Having said that, when it comes to third-party trade between India and Pakistan, there is a significant amount of trade that comes through the Middle East, to Dubai, but also via Singapore. And there is direct trade, fortunately, still on the pharmaceutical APIs, because those are life-saving drugs, and I think both the governments realize that there's value in continuing. So I mean, I don't want to continue. I think we can come back. But I really believe there is a lot of potential. And as Ratna, you mentioned, unless there is trade between the countries, it is very difficult to build relationships. I know that there are cultural ties, particularly between India and Pakistan, and also Bangladesh for that matter. We were one country, not about 75 years ago. And there are lots of bonds. I mean, there are families that, have relationships across the border and so on. And so the cultural ties are significant and they're strong, but we'll come back to, the issues confronting travel and visas and, police reporting and all those, we can come back to that. So I'll just stop there.
Right. So in your experience, how do we deal with this kind of social crisis in SAARC countries?
Okay, I think it is important that irrespective of the political differences between the various countries, and I have to apologize that we end up talking about India, Pakistan in the main. I mean, there are other very important members of South Asia or SAARC rather, and of course Sri Lanka is one of those. But just focusing on India, Pakistan for the time being, I think if a way could be found where travel and visas can be facilitated, even if they are for people of a certain age, because they're likely to be of a lower risk from a security point of view. I think that would be a great start. There was a time when both the countries, I mean, people from both the countries used to go to each other, attend literary festivals, other festivals, etc. Now those are opportunities where you create those bonds. And if you are able to get that people connection going, of course, what has really helped post COVID is the virtual connect. And I've personally attended a number of meetings, virtual meetings, where we've had counterparts from India and of course the rest of the world also. But at least it's continued between India and Pakistan. And so I think what we're trying to do today, I think is a good example of the connectivity that can be maintained, even if physical connectivity cannot be maintained. But of course, physical connectivity is very, very important. So the communication, I think, needs to be maintained across multiple platforms, not just culture or literature, but there are lots of other things, that we can continue to connect. So I think those are important. Now, coming back to trade, because trade at the end of the day, as you rightly said, is a very important component of building a regional relationship. So we are very fortunate at Pakistan Business Council that we are the counterparts, and we have an agreement to exchange information and knowledge and know-how with the Confederation of Indian Industry. And indeed, the Indian and the Pakistani governments about 10 years ago formed an India-Pakistan Joint Business Council, where CII is the secretariat for that in India, and Pakistan Business Council is the secretariat for that in Pakistan. And before the relationship really got sort of worse in the last 4 or 5 years, there were multiple occasions where the PBC delegations went over to India and the CII delegations came over to Pakistan. And whenever we get the opportunity to meet in third countries, I think we still continue and we learn from each other. As in the introduction you mentioned, at that PVC, we've got almost 100 members, and they come from 17 different sectors of the economy. So we've got a very rich component of businesses represented here, and of course, CII is significantly larger than PVC, and has been there for more than about 150 years, etc. So they've got a lot of knowledge. So that knowledge, that exchange, and the providing each other platforms, I think is one way, as soon as the political relationships permit, to be revived, and the physical connects to start happening.
If SAARC reignites its spark, what good things do you think will happen, which can take place and which could help us in economic interdependence again?
I think foremost the cost of goods would come down, so the consumers would benefit. Now there is a school of thought in Pakistan which says that, well, because Indian industry has scale, they are able to outcompete goods that are being produced in Pakistan. Then the unemployment will flow because those sectors would close down. I personally don't think that that would happen because actually competition is good. If you are able to get goods directly from India, without having to go through Dubai or the trading sort of ports, etc., then that would actually trigger innovation in Pakistan and of course bring the benefits of scale, etc. here. The other aspect is that some of the goods are coming from China anyway, and if we can start sourcing the same items, provided of course they're competitive and of the same quality from across the border, then just the saving in the cost of logistics or transportation would justify continuity of trade.
So, Mr. Malik, we are called Puro Innovations, and we always take advice from our speakers. It's always good to know perspective from across region and cultures. What innovative ideas do you have for us? How do you think that we can propagate and double our impact in the region and contribute in world peace?
I think you must continue to do what you're doing today. I think this interaction is very essential. We must continue to talk. As long as we're talking, I think there's a hope. When we stop talking, then I think we've lost hope. So I think first foremost, I would say you continue to talk. You widen the circle. I wish there were more people from Pakistan attending today. Certainly, I would wish that there was somebody from Bangladesh here too. I believe you must have had them in the past. Today,
Yes,
maybe
yeah.
that wasn't possible. Yeah.
And send them the recording as well as the framework that we develop after this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that would be good. I think the other. Sorry to interrupt, but the other thing that I think one both sides need to do is to make sure. See, one aspect of trade is the impact that the tariffs have. But as you know, there are lots of non-tariff barriers also that inhibit trade. So I think in fact, in many ways, those are bigger challenges. So if a brand, for example, goes across from one country and then is seen to be coming from enemy country, and the shop that is selling that gets burned, then that's not obviously helpful. And obviously that those items will not come. So I think it's a question of building up through media and through other means a momentum towards openness and towards accommodation. And in the end, I think all the countries in South Asia would benefit from that.
That is true. That is true. And I'm so happy that you agree with interactions are important, because some people think we're just talking and we don't help. But I believe that it helps. So if you have to give one advice to the world leaders and the leaders of SAARC, what would be that?
Okay, so I think first of all, one should start with one's own country, right? I think what we need to get the leaderships in our own countries to understand the importance of trade. I believe all countries are not at the same level. Maybe the leadership in India understands trade better than perhaps the leadership in Pakistan. But I think that's where we come in. As an organization, we come in, and then we keep repeating those messages and bring forward the positive benefits of the inter-regional trade. So I think that's a task that we must do in each of our countries, and certainly we should do in Pakistan.
My first question to you, Mr. Kura, would be that most of our regional countries go to the West, right, or other developed nations for debts. Do you think that's the right way? If not, what is the solution?
Thank you very much, Rachna. And let me, in the outset, thank you so much for driving this particular initiative among our part of the world. I don't know whether you guys know, but I've been working a lot on trade in the Asian region, and been working very closely on the free trade agreement in different parts of our part of the region. And, just to cite, I think Ishan very beautifully explained how our trade in the SAARC region is about 5.3%. But, in ASEAN, the integration among countries is 35% on trade. And if you take EU, it's 55%. And if you take NAFTA, it happens to be 60%. So it's very sad that we are not driving trade between us. And the recent study by the Asian Development Bank says that ASEAN is worth about $2.4 trillion in terms of wealth, with just 630 million people. But Sri Lanka, or our part of the world of ASEAN, I mean, in terms of SAARC, is about $1,000 billion, which is the kinds of opportunity that we have, and with about almost 2 billion people among our countries, which is the kinds of opportunity which exist, and there is no proper forum to drive this. And before I actually answer your question, Rachna, I mean, SAARC has been continuously trying to do so much of integration work. You had the SAARC Free Trade Secretariat, you had the Development Fund, you had the SAARC Poverty Fund, you had the SAARC Food Bank, which was established in 1988. You had the SAARC Energy Fund, which was set up because 72% of our population of SAARC happens to be in the rural areas. You had the SAARC Climate Change, which was done, called the Malé Protocol. There's so much of opportunity in SAARC, but the political will is not there. And that's why we are living at 5.3% kind of integration rate, while the rest of the world is seeing forward. So as you know, my second point I just want to make is that there's a recession coming to the world. And because of that recession, ADB and World Bank, as well as IMF, says that we will see some kinds of trade decline between us, and the world is going to see a whole flattening happening. So in that background, I think it's an opportunity for us to relook at ourselves and see what we need to do. With regard to the debt, see, our countries are essentially very focused towards raising money from overseas in terms of managing our internal affairs. But I think a time has come, rather than looking at debt, we need to first ask ourselves whether we are running our countries efficiently. So, Rachna, the answer to your question is, rather than looking at debt and seeing whether we need to go to the West or whether we need to go to the East, let's first ask ourselves, what kind of reforms that we need to do in terms of maybe running the way that our countries are run. I mean, Sri Lanka, for instance, our expenditure is 3.4 trillion rupees per annum. Our income is 1.4 trillion. So if we are not going to look at, reducing our expenditure, right, we'll be continuously living in debt. And when you really go, I mean, Eshan, who's been the chairman of Unilever in Sri Lanka, heard a lot about you. I've been also at Unilever for almost 2.5 years, and then I joined back to Diversilever based in India. For about 3 years, I was based in Bombay. I mean, we all know that our companies have gone through reform, and we had to restructure. We have to relook at our business model. And it's just that sadly, you have the best brains in the business world, but that integration to the political hierarchy is not there. And we are not looking at reforming ourselves. A classic example, Rachna, is that if you look at our expenditure of 3.4 trillion, the half of that money is spent on forces, the security forces. So if you were to reduce, say, 500 billion, move that whole group into restructuring and move into the construction sector, you could just imagine your total expenditure comes down to about, say, 2.5 trillion. And then we will look at as to how we can spruce our income to 2.4 from the current 1.4. And it can be done because it's a rich country. So I'm just taking a case in point that rather than looking at whether we should look at the West for debt or whether we should look at the East for debt, let's first ask ourselves, let's restructure before, there are 5 other countries in SAARC who is going to follow us in the Sri Lanka way. I don't know whether you are aware, but there are 61 countries going to go the Sri Lanka way. Is the latest that has been announced by World Bank at the discussion that I was held last 2 weeks. You have the countries that they've identified are Maldives, they have identified Pakistan. There are 4 states in India, which is in the same way. So, you know, I think its time has come for us. I would call this tipping point leadership, where we need to ask ourselves how we want to integrate business to the political hierarchy. And it's our duty right now to see how we can bring that reform into the country in terms of not just looking at the West or the East for debt.
Sri Lankan economic crisis, right? And you just said that the World Bank is in another 61 countries, 2 states in India, Pakistan, Maldives. So welcome more problems. What can we learn immediately? Because we don't have time. SAARC does not have time. What is the way forward?
See, Rachna, the first thing is, I'm so happy that the government of India, whom I have worked very closely with, I got the first funding of $2 million into the UN from the government of India. And at that time, it was your finance minister was Pranab Mukherjee, who actually moved a motion in parliament over there in the Lok Sabha and got it ratified for the first time in the world for government of India to drop money into the UN. And I built that actual industrial zone in Jaffna. Now, I was music to my ears when I heard that there is going to be a ferry that is going to run from the west of Sri Lanka into Trivandrum. And secondly was, of course, there's going to be an air traffic between Palale and South India. And I remember when I spoke to the finance minister at that time, I said that trade is going to come in. And he asked me when. And I think today that has come, where now the South Indian companies can come and set up their business in actual industrial zone, which is north of Sri Lanka. And then, you know, the trade integration will start getting stronger, which actually is going to be the first point, I would say very strongly, that we should start working on, because India has been such a good a friend to us. They have given us crude oil on the line of credit at $2.5 to $3 billion. Yesterday, it was announced by the ambassador that there's another $3.5 billion credit that has been extended. So, I mean, India has been a very good friend. And I think it's time right now that we further, you know, the opportunity has come, Rachna, where people cannot now you know, talk about nationalistic ideas like saying we are Sri Lankan and you guys are Indian, you know, because, you know, people are starving. Ehsan knows about this because he lived in Sri Lanka, that when you look at the hierarchy of our population, you know, you get 40% of the people who are in the DSCC group and maybe another about 30% in the CSCC group, which is the lower spectrum. And those guys are suffering when you have a fuel crisis or when, you know, farming goes out because of a wrong policy decision. So now, you know, nobody can, Rachna, talk saying politics. That word does not exist anymore because people are dying, you know. So this is the best time for my second point that I'm floating in this today's discussion is that, you know, how does Sri Lankan exports reach up to the middle income of India? There is 400 million population over there. And I mean, I had long discussions with the embassy in Sri Lanka. I mean, I remember one particular gentleman who was heading the trade secretariat, and right now I think he's the ambassador in EU. You know, when 3 of our exporters got into India and they started doing business, they bought over a plant in Delhi, Rachna, and after they revamped the whole operation under the Manchi brand name, the owner who has liquidated that property to the bank came back and said claimed ownership, and the government of the court awarded the business back to the Indian owner. But then, you know, when I cited this issue when I was chairman of the Export Development Board continuously, subsequently, you know, the Indian government intervened and somewhere got the property back to the exporter. And today, Manchi brand and the Dambru brand are classic examples in India of a Sri Lankan brand. So I would float very strongly the idea, Rachna, that, you know, the tipping point has happened. The non-tariff barriers between states have to be broken out in India so that the 15 million kilograms of tea that could be exported must be given priority, and the 7 million pieces of apparel, which is under the free trade agreement, must be given, because right now the utilization is below 10%.
Oh God.
Below 10%. and so, when I talked to the last time, Saroja Sirisena was the consular head for Mumbai for Sri Lanka, and right now she's the ambassador in UK. She was talking how Sri Lankan consignment of tea went, and then in Mumbai, what happened was that the NTBs came to play, and subsequently the exporter said, rather than me paying demurrage, let me just burn this tea in the port. So these are unsung discussions, but I think it has to be brought to the surface through the forums like what you are saying, so that if we can do two things, Rachna, from today, if there are two key actions that I'm floating, number one, drive business from the south of India to the actual industrial zone. Number two is open up our exports to the middle income of the 400 billion population in India. If we can drive these 2 points under your leadership, under Furo, the branding and the platform, I think we have done justice to today's discussion.
So in your opinion, if SAARC region came together, it will be the next powerhouse. How do you think we can make that happen? When I say me, we know if there's no political will, then it's like common people like you and me and everyone else who comes on a platform. Some are very established leaders in government or politics, and they have the authority, and some have no authority like me, but an initiative and willingness to do it. How do you think we can do it?
See, I think a very interesting question. In my view, I think a time has come, Rachna, where we need to allow youngsters to come and take our positions. It's a very tough thing to, it's easy to say rhetorically, but when it comes to practically doing something, giving a youngster a chair to sit is quite a challenge. But then, we saw this in Sri Lanka. I mean, private sector should have taken the lead in this current economic debacle, which was totally mismanaged by the policymakers, which is a fact. And it's a story globally. It's not a secret anymore. I mean, you had agricultural philosophy that was launched of organic, where even if you make Sri Lanka totally organic, the market is not big enough for us Sri Lankas to supply. Let's be very clear. So, it was such a foolish decision. Number two is that, when the whole world said go to the IMF early, they might be hard, but restructure. Here is a country like Sri Lanka said, we're going to come out with a homegrown model. Now, both calamities went to a deadlock. And then, of course, you have an unsolicited proposal that of reducing taxes from, where the percentage of taxes to GDP came down from 12% to 8%. When everybody said these are disaster modes, 3 key initiatives that took us Sri Lanka down the tube. Now, the question is that if the private sector had a Ratan Tata of India, who takes the government on, head on, understood, and he runs a huge business, but he says, I'm not worried about you guys while making my business vulnerable to your power. I'm going to say what I have to say. That kind of leadership, if we had in Sri Lanka would have not had this issue. But then, because the private sector and the key policymakers have failed to bring in this proper thinking by the politicians, today you have a set of youngsters who have got together from university who turned the whole country around. And you're talking about a president, Rachna, who beat the most ruthless terror group in the world. And today the guy is fleeing from one country to another. And who did it? A set of youngsters, kids between the ages of 18 and 23 years. So it's a lesson to the world that I think we need to start giving the youngsters a chance to run key policy-making institutes, provided that they have the proper training and they have the proper mentoring. That's one way that we can work it. And number two is that, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Rather than reinventing the wheel, we have a basic structure in place. You have the SAARC Secretariat, you have the SAARC Development Fund, you have the SAARC Disaster Management, you have the SAARC Poverty Fund, you have the SAARC Energy Fund. I mean, you have every structure in place, Rachna.
Right.
All the documentation has been done, but it's just that it's not operationalized. So I think, I don't know, Rachna, if you want to be the president of the SAARC Secretariat, I would put my hand up, and if some of us all get onto that board, with the proper kind of authority and mandate from each of our governments, if we can just make some of those plans a reality in a certain small way, I think that's the biggest win. I mean, a classic example is there's a thing called a SAARC anti-terrorism force. Okay, now if this organization was active, we wouldn't have had the Easter attacks, Rachna, because in the middle of India, the information came in that there was going to be an attack. And I think it came to the Indian embassy, and then for whatever reason, Indian embassy had alerted the Sri Lankan government, but there was a gap of, I think, 1 week. And our guys also, a little bit lackadaisy in their management, and you had 269 people dying, and
Right.
the whole tourism structure fell on the ground. A business which was giving us about $4 billion income, $4 billion income, tourism, came to a crashing halt.
Right.
And Rachna, it's very easy for people to say, we had 2.3 million tourists, and in 2018 and 2019, even after the Easter attacks, we some or other notched in about a 1.8 million tourists. But so those are only statistics, because if you look at the quality of tourists that came in 2018, was amazing. You had the $200, $300 per capita income per day tourists coming in, but in 2019, the guys were coming over at $68. So it was a huge blow. You had the total informal economy that was bursting out, but that was also taken off because. So what I'm trying to say is that my answer to your question is simple. We have a SAARC forum. We have all the structures in place, and I think it's time that the countries get together, put these structures to be operationalized with a strong base of private sector thinking, and I think that will be the best kind of contribution we can make to our part of the world. Over.
That's correct, because I think if our effort, whatever we have done so far and whatever actions we will take in future, if that ignites and the existing dead SAARC as an organization, I think we'll be home, because that's probably the outcome that we are looking at in first year of this project.
Rachna, if I just come in here, just want to share one more point before I lose this thought.
Sure.
Matt Andrews and the team from Harvard, I recommended them into the Sri Lankan hierarchy, and then we brought them in 2019. 2015. 2015, Matt Andrews came in with the professor for trade, and actually they did the whole master plan for Sri Lanka. So I was telling Matt that ideally, if you look at the Harvard alumni, you have a handful of people who have been selected for these kinds of programs. So if we could get together under the Harvard mandate, and give some thinking into the things like the SAARC Secretariat, I'm sure Matt and the rest of the team there would definitely be the catalyst, and we could be the people who would operationalize this project. And since Eshan happens to be chairman of the Business Council in Pakistan, and Rachna, you being one of the top 74 strong influencers on LinkedIn, I'm sure we could make a difference to SAARC.
Definitely, thank you for that, and thank you for all the knowledge, because I think it would have taken us months to read all of these reports, the data that you've given us in the last 20 minutes. So my question is, we are Puro Innovations, and like I said, we love to take feedback. So what is your innovative ideas for us, and how do we double our impact in the region?
SAARC, Rachna, I missed you, Rachna. Sorry. Can I have the question again?
Yeah, so I was saying that we are for innovations, and what innovative ideas do you have for us? How can we propagate and double our impact in the region and contribute in one place?
See, Rachna, I mean, let's be clear here. What does India bring to the table? India brings knowledge. I mean, if you take your university system and the education system, I mean, you guys are fantastic. I mean, I never go to sleep in the night without watching an Indian TV channel. Take it from me. I mean, I love the kinds of intellectual discourse that you have, and I mean, you guys are like, it's brilliant. The thinking that you houses, all the product development houses are they are based in India. So I mean, we don't have that kind of acumen in Sri Lanka, if you look at structurally speaking. So if private sector, like, I mean, if your organization could drive the new product development into the Sri Lankan exporters, you know, where you facilitate this. This could be one way, but be more competitive for these exporters to get into to the Indian market.
So I just wanted to, some parting thoughts. I think Rohit has done an excellent job in contextualizing Sri Lanka, in particular in the context of South Asia. I want to say that, whether it is India, Pakistan, or India, Sri Lanka, or Bangladesh, whatever, India is the biggest country. And as a big brother, big sister, whatever we'd like to call it, a lot of the lead will have to come from India. That's my first point. I think my second point I'd like to say is that the, certainly in the context of India, Pakistan, maybe the right thing to do is to start from the low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit is literally the fruit. And I'm talking about agriculture and food, not just for fruit. I mean, there is a lot of interconnectedness between the either side of the Punjab border, and therefore that is something that India and Pakistan maybe should focus on as a quick win and a low-hanging fruit, because there are times when a particular fruit or vegetable or a crop is short on one side and is abundantly available on the other side. So I think if that could begin, it would really do the people of both India and Pakistan a lot of good. I think those were the two parting sort of words I wanted to leave you with.
I was about to conclude the session in so many words. You already said it, Mr. Malik, because I think he's given us a very deep Sri Lanka, and that's why I say it's almost like a rapid fire course. Like they say, rapid. How do you learn English? And they run those courses. This is how we will learn about each other. I think we have had no knowledge whatsoever so far about SAARC and South Asian countries, and this is time that we awaken, we arise, and I believe we stand for our dignity, South Asia, we stand for our roots, we stand for our history, genetics, culture, languages, and a bright future.